We analyzed the 2022 Baltimore Ravens draft class with a very special guest next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we've returned here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube. And we're back here on a Tuesday episode with our Taco Tuesday guest in Spencer Schultz of Baltimore Beatdown. Spencer, we now know the 11-player Baltimore Ravens 2022 draft class. It was a whirlwind of a draft weekend. The Ravens making moves here and there, taking best player available. How you doing today?
Doing quite well. It was a long weekend. The Ravens made some pretty insane moves in the end. Quite the wheeling and dealing going on. Hollywood Brown out. They end up with 2 first-round picks for the second consecutive year. So they've now brought in 4 first-rounders in the last just about calendar year. And a lot has been shaken up, a lot to digest and get into. But the Ravens will be a deep team, as they always strive to be after this draft class. But do they have the talent? We will see what it takes to get to the playoffs and maybe further in this loaded AFC. So a lot left, but now we've made it through kind of the Super Bowl of the offseason, so to speak. The cards lay as they may, and we get a better picture.
Yeah, it was really a crazy draft weekend, starting off on Thursday night in that first round where Baltimore takes a falling star in safety Kyle Hamilton. Now, the Eagles actually trade up 1 pick ahead of Baltimore, and I personally thought that was going to be for Hamilton, but they take Jordan-Davis, who had been long mocked to the Ravens at number 14. But Hamilton was a player, Spencer, that obviously one of the best players in this class. Safety, not a huge need anymore for the Ravens, though, after signing Marcus Williams to that huge deal, bringing back depth pieces like Tony Jefferson and Geno Stone. But the talent that Hamilton has, that is a pure best player available pick, and one that I was happy with for the Ravens. But obviously, he's not an edge. He's not a corner. He is very versatile. But what do you think of that pick?
It was interesting. I was really looking for Jermaine Johnson there at 14, and that was, of course, ahead of the Hollywood Brown trade. So at that point, I was really keen on Johnson as someone to bring in and immediately contribute in this edge room. But I was pretty lukewarm to the idea of Hamilton. Was truly a best player available for the Ravens at that point. And they go get someone that has a ton of versatility, a ton of length, a basketball background, and you see that show up the way he's kind of like a small forward patrolling between the numbers. So they're going to have a pretty loaded secondary. On third down, they should have a ton of options. Mike McDonald likes to run some jumbo nickel, likes to run some press quarters. And the Ravens have frankly had issues with tight ends in general over the last couple of years, and really for maybe 4 or 5 years. Not having a real matchup player for tight ends. They did maybe have one in Jaron Kearse that ended up going to Dallas and being a really effective one in their scheme, but hadn't really had someone that could go tick for tat with the Travis Kelce's of the world, or even some of the maybe a little bit lesser tight ends. So they're going to bring someone in that can do it all. And Hamilton's going to be a really well-rounded player. He's super young, has a frame that definitely could fill out a little bit more, but is able to do so many different things, wear so many different hats, and really just provide a long, savvy, fluid presence over the middle of the field that should help close throwing windows alongside Marcus Williams, 2 guys with a ton of length and a ton of ability to play above the rim and ball skills and undercut passes and go end plays. So they have guys that can come fit the run off the roof and do all kinds of stuff. So Mike McDonald's got some fun safeties to work with. Chuck Clark feels like his future is a little bit up in the air as of right now. Some rumors coming out about him kind of wanting a long-term commitment or to go elsewhere, and might be just kind of the cherry on top as a result of Kyle Hamilton. So Hamilton's been an ascending player, someone that continuously gets better and better as time goes on, has ball skills, able to do so much. So will be a fun weapon in Mike McDonald's defense. Hopefully they're able to get him up to speed pretty quickly and able to use him effectively and keep him on the field as a rookie and moving forward.
Right, and I'm excited about his fit in this defense. He can slot in a bunch of different places. It also does free up the option to move guys all around the defense. And obviously, you mentioned there with Clark, those rumors, depending on what happens with him, he also can maybe play up in the box or do whatever you want there. So Hamilton gives the Ravens defense a lot of options. He's a very versatile chess piece for Mike McDonald to use. But then the Ravens move back into the first round by trading away wide receiver Marquise Brown. They end up getting pick 23 and also sending out pick 100. They then trade pick 23 for 25 in a fourth round, I believe it was 130. And you then have the Ravens taking center Tyler Linderbaum. Now, Spencer, the center position is one that the Ravens have rarely invested high draft capital or big money in over the course of really for a very, very long time. And now you have one of the best center prospects to come out in years in Linderbaum, but one that is a little bit undersized, not the arm length you would want also in some center prospects. And the scheme fits a little bit questionable, but there's no denying the talent and what he can bring with his athleticism. How did you feel about that selection?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting pick. I'm glad that he wasn't the pick maybe at 14. I would have liked to have, maybe a Traylon Burks or a Jermaine Johnson or a couple other players, maybe even a Kyrie Elam, who they did pass on ultimately. If you're going that kind of far down, but at 25, Linderbaum makes a ton of sense. Ultimately, like you said, they don't really invest in the center position too often. It's resulted in, I think they've only had 2 centers in the last decade, basically following Matt Burke, that have played more than 1 season as the Ravens starting center. So I don't think any of them played 3 years. Matt Skura came the closest. I think he had about 2.5 years there. So really just haven't had the continuity, and any offensive line coach will tell you continuity is the most important aspect of having an offensive line that plays well and plays together. So with that, it frees up Patrick McCary to move back to that swing tackle role and really just be the 6th man that can go fill in wherever you need him. If that's, because Ronnie Stanley's not ready for the season, I think you feel good about having McCary there. If they do need a right tackle, you have McCary there. So I really like that aspect of it. The interesting part to me, scheme-wise, is that it feels like the Ravens might have looked at what the Eagles have been doing with Jason Kelce and some of the option concepts that the Eagles run with Jalen Hurts, a lot of pin and pull, which is a little better designed for the 4-2-5 defenses and kind of the 2021 versions of NFL defenses. The Eagles had a ton of success on pin and pull concepts, using Kelce out in space, being able to get some vertical displacement and lateral displacement with down blocks, and see if they can go get a Ben Cleveland and I guess not Ben Cleveland, but get a tackle and a Linderbaum in space, see if they can go run and make plays. So it'll be interesting to see how they deploy Linderbaum ultimately. Not, the kind of guy who's really going to drive, a Larry Ogunjobi or drive a Fletcher Cox or a Cam Hayward or some of the bigger, stronger nose tackles in football off the ball. Especially lined up kind of shaded or in the A gap, but he is really, really, really outstanding on the move, is able to win with hand placement, is able to win with grip strength, and can really contort his body and refit. He's a really, really, really smart pass processor in terms of picking up on stunts and twists and blitzes and things like that. So he should immediately be a pretty solid option as a pass protector, and definitely has room to continue growing in terms of driving guys out of the A gap. But you don't necessarily run behind your center a ton. What he does best is combo blocks when he works together with a guard to go displace and catch a linebacker. So he should be able to seal off some really nice blocks and go pick guys off. He has a really high kind of hit rate, so to speak, in terms of making blocks in space. It's really difficult as someone who's so big and large, maybe not in his case, he's a little smaller, but for an NFL offensive lineman to go out in space and wall off and successfully make contact with a DB or a linebacker that's quicker, kind of can see where the ball is going and how to undercut it. Linderbaum really connects consistently in the open field. So a fun moving weapon there, and should bring continuity. Hopefully we'll see if he looks a little bit more like a Garrett Bradbury, who hasn't, been able to find his footing, or if we'll see if he looks more like a Jason Kelce. But it feels like somewhere between those two would be a realistic outcome, and hopefully more towards the Jason Kelce side.
Right, the Ravens investing in protecting Lamar Jackson on that offensive line at the center position, with Bradley Bozeman departing for Carolina. Patrick McCary was slotted in to be that center, and the Ravens put up the all-time smoke screen saying they were pretty confident in those guys. They weren't going to sign anybody that could maybe draft a player. But it seems like they were going to roll into the season with McCary and Tristan Colon, but Linderbaum does provide an upgrade there, and it'll be interesting to see how the Ravens do utilize him and how he fits in this Baltimore system. We'll head into our first break here now, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into days 2 and 3 of the Ravens 2022 draft, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Still a ton to talk about on Locked On Ravens. But first, let me tell you a bit about Bet Online, and the Nuggets are eliminated from the playoffs. It's very, very unfortunate, but they're still going on. Matchups with Suns and Mavericks and Celtics and Bucks and all these great matchups matchups. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and sports info. BetOnline is your continued source for your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. So head to the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstriker still here with Spencer Schultz. And Spencer, day one was very eventful for the Ravens with the trade of Marquise Brown and everything going into that, the selections of Kyle Hamilton, Tyler Linderbaum. But this team was not done adding pretty top-end talent. Day two was a very good day for the Ravens in many people's estimations, adding both David Ojabo and Travis Jones, two players who were mocked a lot earlier than they ended up going. Now, Ojabo does have the torn Achilles, so he was mocked to the Ravens before his injury. The Ravens look at him at 45. Jones was sometimes sneaking into the late first round, the second round prospect. The Ravens get him at 76. What were your overall takeaways from day two for this Ravens team in the 2022 draft?
My favorite pick of the Ravens draft class, and maybe of the entire draft, was David Ojabo at 45, someone that had high first round upside prior to his Achilles injury, especially considering the advancements that have recently been made in the procedures that are less invasive now. That's why we end up seeing a Cam Akers get back to the field so quickly. Ravens are dealing with a familiar injury, and Tyus Bowser is also coming off of a similar injury. So there is the risk there nonetheless. But when you're trying to project a player from the draft, from their college team into an NFL defense, there's usually that exact word, a lot of projection. With Ojabo, he's going from Mike Macdonald's defense to Mike Macdonald's defense. So of any team in this draft that can take a swing on David Ojabo, the Ravens are certainly the most well-equipped. They're ultra familiar with him. And for my money, he has just about as much pass rushing upside as anyone in this draft class, maybe save Trayvon Walker. So I think that he has absolutely dynamic tape as a pass rusher. He's super reactive. There's an old quote that says the best technique is no technique, because my technique is a result of your technique. He is so reactive as a pass rusher, the ability to process and identify if a tackle oversets, and he can beat them on an inside spin move or an inside swim, arm over, or if a tackle undersets and he can speed rip around them. He's able to threaten with speed. He's extremely bendy. And one of my favorite things about Ojabo as a pass rusher is that he we'll call it his shots on goal rate is extremely high. He converts pressures into sacks, into quarterback hits at a really high rate. Some guys beat their blocker, but might not be beating their blocker relevant to where a quarterback is in a pocket or on the move. Ojabo has an outstanding feel. He has good eyes and will win to where the quarterback is, and most importantly, where the ball is. He had 5 forced fumbles last year. Someone who plays with length. He has enough strength and still developing strength. In terms of converting speed to power, he hit the 4.55 mark in the 40, 35-inch vertical, 122-inch broad. Those are all really good marks in terms of a threshold of success for edge rushers. So the fluidity there, the ability to just really process and beat tackles with any kind of move is awesome. He marries his knees and his elbows so well as pistons, so he can use hezzy moves and stutters and hesitations to try and get tackles to shoot their hands, and then is able to be reactive, like I mentioned. So definitely has some work to do against the run. You saw him grow so much from the beginning of last season through the end of last season as a run defender, being able to kind of stack and shed and peek and figure out where concepts were. Although he did still have to get taken out by Mike Macdonald quite a bit against Georgia, who couldn't really throw the ball that effectively. So at the same time, there is development in that sense, but the upside there is, in my opinion, if you hit the home run, if he gets back to form and rounds into shape and looks like he did at Michigan with more development, that could be the kind of guy that maybe helps the Ravens make a Super Bowl run, having him to bookend Odafe away, having Tyus Bowser still as well, Justin Houston likely coming back. So maybe not this year, but ultimately, if Ojabo is able to recover well and get back into form and continue developing, he could certainly make a mega impact in this Ravens defense. Really exciting pick. Asked to drop into coverage, I think 51 times last year, according to Sports Info Solutions. You see him able to flip his hips and run. He has great pursuit speed, tons of motor, runs plays down from behind, goes and tracks down receivers, running backs, anybody downfield away from his assignment all the time. So love the player, very much so. The injury's tough. There's a lot of risk. I think my favorite thing about him is that he was Michigan's Scout Team Defensive Player of the Year as a redshirt freshman in 2019. He wasn't even playing in games yet, but he was hustling his tail off to the point where they wanted to give him that award. So he's working on his craft in practice, and he's going to come back and hit it as hard as he can when he is healthy. So I love that pick so much. And then kind of, moving on to the next one, Travis Jones, just a mega mind, man. He's got cinder blocks for hands. He's got anvils and is the kind of dude that can just blow up a game. If he gets a little bit of fresh meat, then in someone that's a little weak in the pants, doesn't quite have sand in the pants, is someone who can anchor or someone that has enough kind of core strength, he will rock guys. He put on a show at the Senior Bowl. I think he had 10 pressures against Clemson. His club and his club rip and his club arm over are absolutely dynamic. He can stand up to double teams. Him and Michael Pierce being able to keep each other fresh is going to be a thing of beauty if they can stay healthy. So Travis Jones, I think, is ready to make an impact, very much so, and is a man amongst boys many times. So really excited to see what he can do. He tested through the roof and is going to be the type of player that should be able to provide some real pass rushing upside as an interior defensive lineman and be someone that has a well-rounded game. So Ravens have been looking for that for so long, and it feels like between Pierce and Jones, they have a little bit more pass rushing upside at the nose position than they have in quite some time.
Yeah, Baltimore's day 2 focused on the front 7, and I love the Ajabo pick. I said after the injury, right after, if he was available at 45, I would have taken him right there. And some people were saying, "Oh, you can't take a player like that there. They need immediate contributions." Well, taking Ajabo now, and even if he doesn't play this season, that's like getting a first rounder next year. And it's worth the wait, in my opinion, just what he showed, what you talked about, Spencer. And then Travis Jones also is the best player available. And plus, we all know Calais Campbell's not the future at the position. And Michael Pierce, probably not the future of the position. Derek Wolfe, same thing. So they have to continue to get younger there. And having a combination of Jones, Justin Metabike, Broderick Washington, they're setting themselves up pretty nicely. Still some work to be done on the defensive line for the future, but I think they have a good foundation right now. But then, Spencer, day 3 came and the Ravens had 6 fourth-round selections to go along with 1 sixth-rounder. Many speculated that they could trade maybe 1 or 2 of those to move up for a player, but they kept all 6 of those fourth-round picks. They kept their 6th-rounder as well. They had 7 total picks in the day 3 of the draft, and they doubled down at corner, doubled down at tight end, took a hulking offensive tackle that was mocked in the 2nd round to the Ravens in many instances. How'd you feel about their day 3?
Yeah, I love the Flaley pick. One of my favorite guys in this draft process. He's certainly still developing, but I think that he's much less raw than people give credit for. And in Mobile, I think he took a lot of flack because coming out of an offense at University of Minnesota that doesn't really run a lot of true drop backs, that don't have a play action attached or tons of RPOs, he wasn't asked to vertical set a ton. So when it kind of fast forward to the combine before getting back to Mobile, he was asked at the combine, what are you working on? What part of your game do you think needs the most work? And he said, my vertical sets. He said, I didn't get to do it as much at Minnesota in our scheme. So that's something I've really been practicing at. And when he goes to Mobile, you can see certain things that he wasn't using that are in his repertoire. For instance, he has incredible prodigious length, 99.9th percentile length, wingspan, arm length, and has a really mean trap or snatch and trap, which is where you just knock a blocker or knock a pass rusher's both of their arms down, and then you shove their shoulder pads down and kind of lay on top of them. If you watch any single game he played in, you can make a borderline highlight tape of his snatch and trap. He didn't try it once in Mobile. He didn't use several other instances like that. Saw him just working on the vertical set game. Independent hand usage was a problem of his at University of Minnesota, where you don't see him able to use his left and right hand independently, and not a lot of chess in terms of flashing hand strikes. So we see him in Mobile throughout the week. Start using a ghost hand, basically a fake punch with your outside hand. And, Majay Sanders from Cincinnati had kind of a clip that blew up, went viral during that practice, those one-on-ones that get so much publicity, and kind of went viral, got into his pads, knocked Flaley right over. And then we see him go back day 3 and use a ghost hand, get Majay Sanders to show his hands, and then absolutely dominate him. Very fluid mover for his size. You think, this big mountainous man, he's going to be burly and he's going to be slow. Well, he's not. He's really great in zone concepts. He connects with, like I was saying about Linderbaum, he connects with linebackers in space an absurd amount considering how large he is. Super fluid mover. He bends at the knees, not the waist. So there are certainly still some things to work on. He does give his chest up a lot, and he kind of can get away with it, especially in college, because he's so heavy and has good balance so that he can basically lose a rep and still not lose a rep. But I don't know if you're going to be able to get away with that with a Khalil Mack coming at you, or someone that has a little bit more strength than someone you saw in the Big Ten, some grown man strength. So I absolutely love that pick. Definitely really liked The Jalen Armour-Davis pick fits what the Ravens do. He's 6'1", 200 pounds. He's long. He's physical. Not the twitchiest or excuse me, not the most fluid mover. His hips are a little rigid at times. He really struggles to locate the ball at times. But when the play's in front of him and when you ask him to go press jam, he can do a lot. He squeezes guys to the sideline effectively. Just really needs to work on getting his head around and working on ball skills. Didn't really have a ton at Alabama, something Marlon Humphrey struggled with throughout his career a little bit. So maybe he needs to go hang out with Marcus Peters a little more, just like Marlon Humphrey needs to as well. But someone that can come in and press and be physical, I think he profiles as a potential starter. Was pretty impressed with that. Between the two tight ends, Kolar and Likely, you're likely to get a productive backup tight end, if not someone who's capable of starting. They obviously go get Jordan Stout, who was punter one, not the kick god in this draft. Stout, some of the best control of any punter in the last decade. And I kind of called that on the Baltimore Beatdown podcast quite a few times. Everybody was all up in arms about Areza. He's got all these cool YouTube videos and whatnot. But Stout was the guy that was regarded a little bit higher. And then they kind of capped the end of that fourth round off with Demarion Williams, who is an uber physical Tavon Young replacement who can come downhill and hit, keeps plays in front of him, wants to play like a Raven, do all those things. Super, super, super aggressive, punches really hard when he jams. He's twitchy and bouncy, a little bit kind of like a Jalen Petrie, not the kind of guy that can really turn and run downfield or, take someone with speed and kind of take them out of the game or stay in their hip pocket so much, but he can really come out of his back pedal and go thump. He likes to make plays in the run game. He plays with a ton of fire, and it's just a classic John Harbaugh, Eric DaCosta, two-time team captain kind of pick. So he was definitely intriguing. And then finally they capped it off with Tyler Beatty, who is a fun running back, man. He's got a pretty complete game. It was a little surprising to see him go quite that late. He is a little undersized, but he's got some runaway speed. He definitely has good pad level. He's solid in pass pro, decleated guys quite a few times. Uber productive in the SEC. I think he forced 59 missed tackles last year, and think he's the kind of guy that could turn into a definite high rotation kind of back. Kind of reminds you of Kenneth Gainwell. I really like that Lance Zierlein comparison. I think you can find on NFL.com. But not the most big or strong, and he's not the fastest guy, but definitely has a really well-rounded game and has enough burst, has multiple gears, knows how to get skinny through creases and go hit some serious home runs a little bit. He's a contributor in the pass game. He can help you on special teams, and it feels like he's a really fun, happy-go-lucky kind of guy that's going to be a tough runner for you that can contribute in the pass game and is used to having a workload. So if there's a guy like J.K. Dobbins or Gus Edwards that's not able to go, I think Beatty will get integrated pretty quickly and be able to give a little bit of juice. I think he ultimately will be able to edge Justice Hill out of a job, and I think Beatty could be a nice player. While maybe never somebody you have on your fantasy team necessarily, someone who does make a contribution and maybe turns into like a 500-yard guy here in the next couple years for the Ravens.
Yeah, very busy for the Ravens on day 3. And I know, Spencer, we talked about how the Ravens could consolidate their picks a little bit, trade up for a guy. They decided to add more than they had originally. So they started with 10, they end with 11. What's your overall grade for this draft? Do you feel like they did well for themselves here? Or would you like to see a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll give it 2 thumbs up. At the same time, it's going to be interesting to look back and see how that run on wide receivers that went just ahead of the Ravens, Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams, and Chris Olave coming off the board in 4 out of 5 picks, I believe, or 4 out of 6 picks. Jordan Davis wedged in there and Charles Cross as well. So knowing that the Hollywood Brown trade was pretty much imminent, the Ravens didn't do the same thing the Titans did and go for that 1-to-1. We'll see if Treylon Burks becomes a super productive player. That one might hurt you a little bit. But Kyle Hamilton should be a good player, and it's going to be interesting to see how Linderbaum shapes out. If he kind of ends up being kind of like that Garrett Bradbury, who's has some nice moments but is unable to really deal with NFL size and strength, then it's going to be a difficult pill to swallow. But I think they did a nice job on day 2. That was really the home run for me. I love David Ojabo. I'm willing to go take a player that could maybe never play a snap in Baltimore or maybe never find, starter snaps at all, because I'm so happy with that upside. I'm so excited to see if that is able to be attained. And I think it is relatively reachable of something that you could get in a really dynamic pass rusher. And Travis Jones, like you said earlier, someone that is a potential first, second round guy, falls a little bit. Who knows why? But apparently Anthony Weaver for the Ravens, the defensive line coach, stands up on the table and demands that the Ravens get him. They bring him in, and I think he's going to be a little bit of a beast in the trenches, pairing him with Calais Campbell, Michael Pierce, Justin Madubuike, Adafe Owe. All these guys is going to be a lot of fun. They've got some pretty mean dudes up front. Feels like they really needed to revamp that defensive front that's been relying on some aging veterans for so long. He's going to get to work with some fun guys in Pierce and Wolf and Campbell and hopefully develop into something that turns into a really nice kind of full-time starter for them post Michael Pierce and is able to immediately contribute. So all those day 3 picks, as Eric DeCosta says, it's a lot of lottery tickets. We'll see. There's not a super high hit rate on 4th round picks typically or thereafter. But if one or two of those guys can turn into a starter for you, then you've probably walked out of this draft with 3-4 starters. And that's a home run any time. So if they're able to get, even 2 or 3 starters in this class, which feels pretty attainable, and we're going to exclude the punter from that because we assume he's going to be a starter. But if all those other guys turn into 2 or 3 starters, I think you're in a pretty good spot. I love the Daniel Falele pick. I love the David Ojabo pick. I love the Travis Jones pick. Those are the ones that I think really made this into a fun class for Baltimore.
Yeah, the Ravens certainly had their swings. They got up to the plate, swung a lot, and we'll see how many of those guys turn into starters. I feel like there could be a couple, especially just with how many guys fell, the traits they have, the fit in this system. There's a lot of potential with this class. Obviously, you never know. We're going to kind of look back on this in a couple of years and say, well, this guy did great, this guy didn't. But at the same time, I have a lot of hope for this draft class, definitely. We'll head into our final break here, though. When we get back, we'll be diving into a bit of what the Ravens could do with the wide receiver position and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still going to talk about on Locked On Ravens. First, I want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto, and this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto, and there are ever-increasing numbers of makes and models. It's really impossible for your local auto parts store to stock all the parts you need, and sometimes you can have intimidating questioning and seemingly often pointless questioning, and the person behind the counter can really only order the parts in their computer, and they can choose only the brand their warehouse happens to carry. Well, now you have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. You can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto prices are reliably low for every customer as well. So go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On there. How'd you hear about us back so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with Spencer Schultz, talking Ravens draft. But Spencer, let's talk a bit about what happened after the draft, because there were no wide receivers taken by this team. They doubled down at tight end. The Ravens now have Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, James Prochet, and Tylan Wallace as kind of their top 4 guys. They have a couple of other players on the roster, like Benjamin Victor, for example, but they now have to adjust that position, I feel like, whether it be with the signing, whether it be with the trade. Where do you feel like they should go now that Marquise Brown is not in Baltimore any longer?
Well, it's easy to kind of point and say, they should go get DK Metcalf. They should go get Terry McLaurin. They should go trade for those guys. But time and time again, they've kind of shied away from that. It doesn't seem to be who they are. It doesn't seem to be what they align with as an organization right now, or the style of football that they want to play. Hopefully I'm wrong. I think that they are seriously doing themselves a disservice, especially coming off of a season where we saw a record number of injuries in modern football, to now go into a season relying so heavily on Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman to give you 34 games, or at least, 30 games between the two of them, feels like a disservice, feels like a turnoff for Lamar Jackson. And it's a really tough pill to swallow. So where can they go free agency wise? You can bring in a Will Fuller, sure. Hopefully get 8 games out of him like you just did with Sammy Watkins. You can kick the tires on Julio Jones, who's similarly, hasn't been able to stay on the field as much as you would have liked, but it's tough. It's a tough decision. Seems like, Jarvis Landry is going to be going back. You can go sign, some fly on the wall, Jeremy Maclin type, like you have so many times before. The Ravens, essentially, I kind of wrote an article a couple weeks ago or maybe a month ago about how they should be having honest discussions about bringing someone in addition to Rashad Bateman and Marquise Brown in the event that one of them weren't able to go, and ensuring that you have a balanced enough offense that can threaten and attack any type of defense. So to me, if they don't go make a receiver move, it says, we don't really care how deep we go this season. We're going to strap together and band of brothers, and we've got Lamar Jackson and, Andrews and the running backs, and hoping, it looks like Bateman's going to be a star player in my eyes. But again, it feels like one step forward, 2 steps back from where you were in 2019, where you were in 2020, and they finally, get that Rashad Bateman element to it, and you could have added another guy on there, finally become fully lethal, and instead, you end up with Bateman and a group of guys that are hopefully, going to be surprising or, promising. I think we all know James Prochet, Devin Duvernay, Tylan Wallace can make plays, but it doesn't feel like a unit that's going to go threaten. And I think if the Ravens are serious, then they'll go make that move. But at the same time, with Lamar Jackson, contract talks seeming pretty cold, not really having much headway there, a lot of weird uncertainty and smoke coming out of that situation, it's kind of hard to make big spends or allocate a ton of capital, whether it be draft picks and or $100 million contract to an AJ Brown or someone of that nature, when you're not sure if you have your quarterback situation locked up as of now. There's franchise tags that can be had and things like that. But if Lamar Jackson wants out at some point, then it's going to be difficult to kind of swing out of that. So it feels like until that domino falls, really being more of like an Easter Island sized domino, then it's difficult to go make another huge move. So all of the moves we've seen the Ravens make, bringing in Marcus Williams, drafting Kyle Hamilton and Linderbaum, feel like really long-term moves where you can't strike out in the immediate with those, and you're not really mortgaging the future on anything. And to me, it kind of says they're a little unsure of the way that this Lamar Jackson contract situation is going to transpire. So they're hesitant to pull the trigger on something that elevates them into going and winning now. I do think that the smart aspect of that is that they're in the AFC. They could go get Terry McLaurin or DK Metcalf. And guess what? They'd be stacked. And people would call them a top 5 team and a real Super Bowl dark horse and a contender and all of those things. But guess what? They could still go lose in the divisional round. So it's kind of a smart time to not be going all in, as we're watching so many teams in the AFC move heaven and earth to be able to go, make that run. Guess what? How many AFC teams went all in, so to speak, this year? 6, 7? Guess what? One is going to win the conference, and they might not win the Super Bowl still. So kind of punting that year and saving a lot of money, having an endless amount of possibilities could be a great thing. But if you lose a kind of franchise quarterback or a franchise quarterback in the midst of it, you're back to square one. You're in quarterback purgatory, and you can go, say, oh, well, they could draft someone, or, oh, they could do this or that, but you're not sure what you're going to get in the end. You're unsure. How's Russell Wilson going to do in Denver even? He's coming off of a rough year. Who knows? But ultimately, being in quarterback purgatory is not a fun place to be ever. And getting into that situation from where they were 2019 and 2020 would just feel really, really, really difficult to swallow. There is a lot to be figured out still, and most of that revolves around Lamar Jackson. And I think in order for the wide receiver room to fall into place, that needs to fall into place first. And if Lamar Jackson is not ultimately going to be a Raven for the next 3, 4, 5 years, then getting a receiver is a little bit futile.
Right. I mean, I feel like disaster scenario number one is if Lamar Jackson asks out, and then as a franchise, they have to make a lot of decisions, ask a lot of questions, and figure it out from there. So going in on a wide receiver, like obviously Lamar Jackson deserves help. He deserves to have a deep wide receiver room. And this is not me like trashing Rashad Bateman or Devin. Like I think those guys are all very talented players. Like they all can make an impact. But I think if you add more to that room, you get the best out of those players. You get the best out of Lamar Jackson. It helps free up a lot. You talked about that balanced offense. We saw at the beginning of last season, the passing offense looked pretty good. And then obviously injuries struck and Lamar Jackson goes out and everything happens and it kind of falls down to earth. In fact, it crashes. But I think at the same time, you have to do a favor to your quarterback, a player that has won games, won MVPs with Seth Roberts and Willie Snead and those types of guys as top flight receivers. Again, no shade to those guys, but they're not Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins, etc. So I think it's an interesting situation they are in right now, but we'll see how they end up playing it and figuring out what they do there. But Spencer, I do want to move over to the defensive side of the ball quickly and talk a bit about Brandon Stevens and kind of his situation right now, because what he is came into the league as a corner after playing running back a little bit, started at safety for the Ravens a lot, is very versatile, but it seems like now with the addition of Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams in there, the cornerback's where he's probably going to be. So how do you feel like he will fit into this defense in 2022 with all the additions the team has made?
Yeah, I think he's able to step into that nickel role very quickly. We'll see what happens with Chuck Clark. They're obviously going to want to get Kyle Hamilton on the field, but Brandon Stevens is a really unique player. He has incredible hips. He plays with a ton of physicality. He is able to run plays down from behind. Definitely still emerging, and having such a versatile, wide open skill set, you can use him as a matchup player. I think he's great by the line of scrimmage. I think he'd be awesome blitzing and fitting the run from that inside alignment. And I'm excited to see him able to bring that element of physicality. He was, obviously a 4-star running back, obviously a productive kind of guy that can go hit. And we saw that at times last year. He seems like a guy that can go end plays and did end plays. So bringing that versatile skill set, that physicality, that speed, and the ability to play actual true man coverage as a bigger guy in lieu of the smaller corners that we typically see on the inside is going to be able to help out against tight ends, help out against running backs, help out in the run game, and go be a dynamic blitzer. So I'm really excited for Brandon Stephens to get freed up. I love what we saw in the back half of last year when he stepped into a more heavy role. And I think that he possesses a really unique skill set and tons of physicality, tons of athletic ability, and ultimately is just the kind of athlete that can wear many hats and go make noise as a matchup weapon. There's going to be kind of that peak athlete, I think, someone who's maybe a little smaller than a tight end and a little more powerful than the average receiver. And I think he's the kind of guy that can go match up, play some bump and run, go make plays for you, go hit, close plays out, has ball skills to a degree. I think he would have liked to have another couple interceptions last year. Maybe that's why he's on the defensive side of the football, but can go break up passes and do all of those things. So very excited for him to step into that kind of nickel corner role, have some safety versatility, and be able to do some pretty exotic looks between him, Hamilton, Williams, Clark, all those guys. And don't forget that Marlon likes to play in the slot as well, too. So they could definitely roll some post-snap looks, invert some cover two, things like that, and have Brandon Stephens go be a pretty fun impact player.
Yeah, and one other forgotten name, Darius Washington, someone who it feels like the team likes as a nickel guy. So with all the depth that they have now, obviously DeMarion Williams kind of factoring into that as well, he'll probably make the team as a fourth rounder. So where does this team cut players if they have to cut players? If there's a guy that is kind of going up with another one and they have to make a tough decision, that could be something the team has to look at in the future. But for now, obviously stacking depth is very important. The team didn't have a lot of that exiting 2021, so at least they have that at the moment. But Spencer, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show, talking Ravens draft with me. What do you have coming up on the docket in terms of what you're working with?
Content on BaltimoreBeatdown.com, cutting up the tape of that rookie draft class, trying to get some big picture perspectives of what the Ravens are going to look like in 2022, how they're going to be able to look under Mike McDonald's kind of press quarters defense, and how they might be deploying, a Kyle Hamilton, and what we can expect out of a Tyler Linderbaum and things of that nature, what's on the docket for Odafe Oweh, looking at Rashad Bateman as a real wide receiver one candidate this year, and someone that's going to get every opportunity to be. So all of that you can find at BaltimoreBeatdown.com. You can find my podcast at Podcast Beatdown or Baltimore Beatdown Podcast, anywhere you can get podcasts. And I'll be chopping it up until the season starts, starting to speculate and see what we can do and going over all kinds of scenarios. Hopefully we'll be able to get the schedule here soon and really get a good understanding of how the Ravens season is going to ebb and flow. And it seems like every month the Ravens are making some kind of move. So we'll see what happens in the near future. But for now, we've got the draft class to worry about, and that's where I'll be chopping it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And all the links to Spencer's work will be in the description below. Be sure to follow him on Twitter as well, at Ravens for Dummies. That also in the description. But thanks again, Spencer. That's all I have for you today on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be diving into more Ravens talk, answering your mailbag questions. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you tomorrow.